Continue.
Cool.
We're getting live on the Facebook. I just said that the old school, the old way, like we're getting on the Facebook.
That's how you know what age you are when you start putting "the" in front of
The
things.
Google.
You know, the Google, the internet, the web.
Unless you grow up in Southern California and you call it the 5, the 405.
Yeah, right. If you can shorten that, then you know you're a local.
The OC.
Or it's like when you're in Paso, right? If I call the restaurant La Petite Canal, they'd be like, no, it's LPC. We don't know what you're talking about. That's how you start calling people out.
My favorite is Newport, Balboa Peninsula. If you live there, it's the Pinin.
Is it really?
You're on the Pinin, yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah.
It is. Really? That's like abbreviating just to try to be cool.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
That's obnoxious.
Everything about Newport is obnoxious.
That's hilarious, though. All right on. It looks like, we are live over on the Facebook side of things.
Cool.
All right.
And we're good to go over here on Zoom. We've got a few people already joining us.
Excellent.
Some of our regulars that watch every time. We're not every week anymore, and honestly, we've been lagging on that, but it's just getting so busy now. Where we're just talking about that kind of just before going live here on how busy everybody is these days, and now that we can have live events again and all of that, it's like, ooh, okay, we gotta rethink this virtual platform and how we do things here. We got Steve and Martha Hewitt checking in from Columbus, Ohio. And you spent the last 10 days on the Central Coast and 6 in Paso. Nice. Oh, I missed you. You were at Hospice de Rhone. Unless you saw me and I didn't see you, and I apologize because there was a lot going on. But that was actually a really, really, really fun event here in Paso, where it's a big celebration of the Rhone varieties. So I attended a seminar and a luncheon and a nice big walk around tasting, but that was it. Only on that Friday. I could not swing Saturday after being gone for a week camping, so needed a little family time. All right, here we go. Welcome everyone to the Paso Wine Hour. Chris Taranto here again with Paso Robles Wine Country Alliance, and we appreciate you watching, whether you're watching live or you're watching our recording over on Facebook. It lives there for a little while. We appreciate you tuning in and checking out what's new in Paso. This week, or this installment on Paso Wine Hour, we're going to be talking about a book that recently came out about Paso Robles wine country. Before we get there, though, real quick, what's happening? What's happening out in the vineyards right now? We'll get a show together again here real soon to talk about how this year is already shaping up, even though it's a little early. But at least for now, note that we're basically in the at that point of tendriling and growth, and lots of nice, good green growth. We've had a couple little splash and dash events where it really didn't do much to affect the overall of Paso wine country, with the exception of maybe helping to stave off some frost events and the like. And so it's been, kind of warm even in a sense. So we've been all right there, but we're not out of the woods yet. Actually, we often talk about how mid-September, geez, mid-May is often the cutoff for where you don't have to worry much about frost events anymore. And so I guess we'll see by Winefest is usually that time period. But at least for now, the rains are, keeping the ground kind of moist and not drying out all that quickly. And I guess giving a little bit extra moisture to some of the wildflowers that are here. So we are talking, what are we talking about? You know what? Before we do that, I want to introduce our guest. Sorry, I just kind of went a little fast on that one. Naushad Huda with Drive-Through Books, as well as Paul Hodgins, Drive-Through Books. Welcome, guys. I want to give each of you a second to say hello. Naushad, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hey, how's it going, everybody? What's up, Chris? Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Naushad Huda. By day, I am a strategist for the world's largest advertising agency. And then by night, I drink wine and publish books.
and many other things wine.
And yes,
You have quite the appetite, and I don't mean this in like the guy's drinking wine all the time, but he has quite the appetite for everything wine. So
yeah, I'm definitely a wine geek, I think, by all dimensions, and being able to bring in the entrepreneurial side and that kind of energy into the passion of wine is sort of my happy place.
awesome. Paul, welcome.
Nice to be here. Well, I will start off by saying that I am complete charlatan in the world of wine. I started off as a music professor. I got my doctorate at USC. I taught music at UC Irvine, and then most recently back at USC, my alma mater. Life got a little boring after about 10 years in academia, so I got a job in journalism at the Orange County Register. I was writing about the arts, culture was fun. And about 5 years into that, the guy who wrote the wine column was promoted to be the investigations editor. And they asked me if I'd like to write about wine. I went, well, sure, I like wine. Why not? That was the only qualification needed for the job. So I spent the next 15 years being taught by my readers and by the wonderful winemakers of California about wine. I was very lucky to have the job, and by the end of it all, I knew a thing or two. I now work full time in the advertising industry, like Naushad. I'm a senior copywriter with a firm from New York.
Oh, excellent. I actually did not know that. I thought you were still teaching over at USC.
Copywriting pays about 5 times as much as teaching at USC.
We
So
should talk afterward then. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for being on. You know, we get here at the Wine Alliance, we get a lot of offers on like, hey, I got a great idea for a book on wine country, or I've got a great, you know, reality television show or a movie or something. Somebody's always pitching us something about wine country. And it's like, okay, all right, well, you know, what's it going to take? First off, it's what's it going to take? And they're like, oh, it's only $50,000 a day for you to pay us to do that. It's like, oh, okay, well, there goes our entire, you know, 10-year salary. And so, but then again, sometimes somebody comes along and it's like, oh no, we're going to write a book about Paso, and we're going to do it and self-publish it and get it done, and we're going to get it done. And then all of a sudden it actually happens, and it actually happened with this. This is Drive Through Paso, your ultimate companion to Paso Robles wine regions. And this is where we are right now, and this is what we're talking about, because these two guys, and I want to get your backstories on how you guys met and how all of this came to be, but these two guys actually made it happen and published the book and did it like within what? I mean,
couple of years. Yeah.
2 years, and it would have been quicker, but we were obviously in the midst of, you know, we chose to come up to Paso to start the research the February before, literally a month before everything shut down.
Yeah, that's right.
So we were, you know, we had to just roll with the punches and didn't think it was appropriate to release it a year later. So we took a little more time with it and released it 2 years later.
So I'll tell our origin story, and you can add to it, Naushad. So I'm working away one day at the registry, and I get a call out of the blue from this guy who he wants to get to know me better, right? And has a proposal or two, has some interesting ideas. And my first question to him was, "What do you want from me?" Because I often get calls like that from people who, you know, they want to get on the free wine gravy train, or they want to be wine critics and want to know how to do it, you know. But after talking to him for a while, I realized he was pretty serious about these projects that he wanted to start, and he'd already made a sort of a splash in the wine world with I Like This Grape. So maybe you want to carry on from there, Naushad.
Yeah, essentially, you know, my whole perspective of wine is I get the privilege of looking at the wine world outside in. I'm not someone that's an insider. I'm not in that world from that, you know, by that definition. And so when I got into wine, which is about, I don't know, call it 9 years ago now, it was really hard to learn about wine. It's a very intimidating space, right? I mean, just buying a bottle of wine at a grocery store, you're staring at a wall of black bottles that all look similar, with words you sometimes can't pronounce or don't understand. So the wine world is very difficult to sort of get into, especially if you're not from that world. It's not in your culture. It's not part of your family history or anything of that sort. And so putting on my day job hat, which is I'm a strategist, you know, what I saw 9 years ago was in a very large industry, right? Global multi-billion-dollar industry. And I saw consumers who were dramatically changing and evolving from how you discover products to how you purchase products to how you become loyal to a product or a brand. That was shifting and changing immensely, right? We can point to the digital space. This is 9 years ago. And so to me, there was a misalignment because this industry here wasn't changing at the speed, rate, and depth at which people were changing. And so there's a misalignment. So how do you align the two? How do you make it so that, wine is something that consumers today and moving forward can easily learn about, think about, and have it be part of their world, whether or not it's from their culture or from their family or not. And so that's where it all started. And I had concepts of like, okay, well, how do you make the wine world more relatable? And the easiest example I can point to is, I didn't know about Cristal Champagne. Biggie Smalls and his rap music told me about Cristal Champagne when I was in college. Cristal Champagne is not advertising to that demographic, but they needed a conduit, right? And hip hop in that instance, in this example, was that conduit. So what's the conduit to get wine over to the masses and this new generation today? And that's sort of the existential kind of question I've been wanting to ask, and I have theories around answering. And so throughout the years, I've been experimenting with different ideas in wine, from super experiential events to things like this book, which are quite unique in what the book is. It's not a typical wine book, in my opinion.
So a question though for you on the typical wine book and everything that you just said is that in order to connect with people, in order to make these connections and sell wine, all that kind of stuff, everything is kind of all here these days. And very few people are doing paper these days, but yet you get paper. That's where you went.
Yeah. And part of it's funny because now when I look back at the data, because so this is our second book, right? The first book is called Drive Through Napa, which is that one, also a wonderful book. We put out an ebook, we put out an audiobook, and we put a paperback out. And wisdom at that point would tell you that, well, of course you're going to sell more ebooks. But no, we've sold more paperbacks like 10 to 1. It's not even funny because I think there is just something so wonderful in holding a book that is different than holding a CD. I don't want to hold a CD. I'm okay with all that shit being on Spotify. But there's a tactile experience that's missing. And, just through the data, the experience of doing the books that we have, paperback is one. But yeah, it was different to shift my mind from how do we design for digital, which is what my world is, to designing for having our designer design for paperback.
Well, you talk about the experiential side. I think that's the wonderful thing about this book is that it's old school. You can take notes in it. We leave lots of space for you to take notes. You can get winemakers' signatures. In that sense, it performs a lot of tasks that an ebook never could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really neat how really open and easy it is to read. And we have a comment over on Facebook from Dave Guida. He says he picked up a copy at Blendfest because these guys came up to Blendfest when we did it back in February over on the coast and sold a few books. I think you guys sold out actually.
Yeah, we did.
And at Blendfest, there's plenty of books online, everyone, don't freak out. But it would probably be in Dave's best interest if it was completely sold out, because he says that he read it through immediately, interesting, easy read, very informative, got an autographed copy. And now that he's done with it, probably sell it on eBay for thousands of dollars with those autographs. So, but it's an easy book to be able to go through and read really pretty much in just one sitting. I mean, and get a lot of information that you can go back and reference.
I'd like to say we sort of walked a fine line there because we wanted it to be a fairly easy read and not intimidating. On the other hand, the chapter that gets into detail with the AVAs, which incidentally you were a great help with, gets quite geeky. And we wanted a level of geekiness there so that if you really wanted to dive that deep into Paso Robles wine, you could. This book doesn't shortchange those who enjoy the geekiness of wine. But we didn't want to make it so dense and impenetrable that people would stop reading after the first chapter.
Yeah, we like to say that you can read the book in an hour and a half or 3 glasses of wine, whatever comes first.
In a glass of wine?
3 glasses of wine.
Oh, 3?
Yeah.
Maybe a bottle or 2.
It depends.
I guess it depends on how fast you read and or drink.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, you and I have had some wine. I'm gonna go ahead and say three is a pretty good number for that amount of
Okay,
time.
that'll work. When you go through, and it's what's great is how this book is put together. And can you guys talk a little bit about the logic behind how and why you put it together in the manner that you did, like basically in the order that you did? You go into your intro and history, you do the sub AVAs or the nested AVAs, and then you do winemaker interviews. I mean, what brought you into that process? Where was your kind of your thinking on that?
Go ahead, Naushad.
It's different than the Napa one.
Yeah, how about this? I'll talk about what the Napa structure was and the thinking behind that, and then Paul can get into the Paso one. So with Napa, our first book, the idea was like there's 16 sub AVAs in Napa Valley. But let me take a step back. The overall larger goal of our books and what we're trying to do is we're not trying to tell anybody where to go drink wine in Paso or Napa or anywhere else. That's not the purpose of this book. The purpose of our books is to make it so that it's easy for you to have enough information so that you can feel confident to go discover that wine region. That's the whole purpose. So how do we do that? The first iteration, which was the Napa book, was, okay, well, we can do that. We can accomplish that goal of discovery and building confidence in people by talking about the sub-AVAs. We think that's important because each of those sub-AVAs is very different than each other, just like it is in Paso. They all produce different kinds of wine, right? A Cabernet from Calistoga is much different than a Cabernet from Oakville. So let's go into the sub-AVAs. When we go into the sub-AVAs, we'll include winemakers who grow grapes in that region and get interviews. So the Napa book was very divided by the sub-AVAs, which are also quite, they have a history of sub-AVAs. There's no contention in the sub-AVAs in Napa. When it came time for Paso, one of the things Paul was really adamant about was, hey, look, the sub-AVAs in Paso are fairly new. They're not as well defined just yet. I don't think there's it's not that well known in the market just yet. So perhaps we should restructure it differently. And so Paul was really the architect behind, structuring the book the way that it is today for Paso. We didn't want to just follow the same formula for Napa because trying to do what we did there in Paso, I think would have yielded a failure. So we had to change it because it had to be unique to what Paso is. And I think Paul can probably dive into what his thinking was in architecting it that way.
Yeah. Um, as Naushad said, I mean, a lot of these AVAs, especially out east, Highland, San Juan Creek, it's not like you can go out there and hit a dozen wineries. It's not like Napa in that regard. Some of these areas are yet to be developed and explored. So I thought it made most sense to think of the overall area as roughly a circle, a very rough circle. And if you were to proceed counterclockwise, starting with Adelaida and going down Vineyard Drive and east on the 46, you could do a sort of a circle route. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend doing it in one day. And by doing that route, you could probably hit all of the active AVAs. And we didn't shortchange the ones that weren't active, but we spent a little bit more time describing the ones that were and the ones that people are more likely to visit, simply because there are wineries with tasting rooms there.
I think you capture that pretty visually here too with the circle.
Yeah.
And then you give your list of wineries. And so it's not exactly a guide, like go to this winery for this and go to this winery for that, but rather talking about the AVAs, giving a list of who's out there, and really kind of helping to give context to why we have 11 sub AVAs or nested AVAs, right?
Yeah.
Right. And we decided to end with Tin City because I think it's important both as an area and as a concept. I mean, this is happening in other wine regions too, where there's a centralized location where the smaller wineries, perhaps the ones that can't really have tasting rooms at their facilities, can establish a little in-town beachhead. We know this is going on in Lompoc and Santa Barbara and other places, but I think in Paso, it's particularly well conceived and well developed. So we felt that Tin City deserved its own examination, its own chapter.
Yeah. How did you guys discover Paso? Paul, I should say, you and I, we've had kind of a long going relationship as you as a journalist and me as a PR, when you've had questions about Paso, and also, Anne, your wife as well, who, was a food writer, travel writer as well. So, we've gotten to know each other over the years, but prior to that, I mean, how did you even discover Paso?
Wow. Well, this will really date me, but I drove through the area on my way down from Canada. I'm from Vancouver originally with my girlfriend at the time, and we drove. I didn't know anything about the Central Coast, and I remember we stopping at one of the very few wineries. I think it was Gary Everly's winery, and tasting the wine. And I remember that there were maybe a dozen wineries total at that point. This is in the 80s, right? We were going down to LA. And I just remember being very impressed by the physical beauty of the place and making a mental note to myself that I wanted to come back. Well, I didn't really start exploring again until the 90s, late 90s, when I got my job at the Register and I was writing casually about wine before I got the job of wine critic. And I liked Paso because it was number one, drivable in 4 hours from Orange County. It's going to Napa is a major journey, as you know, from Southern California. And number two, it just seemed to be more appealing to me, a little more open, a little more accessible. I liked the Paso attitude. I liked the idea of the Paso blend. I didn't. I felt more welcomed there, and I felt like I was getting at the beginning of something when I was coming up to Paso in the mid to late '90s. I could tell that it was about to take off. That feeling was definitely in the air back then.
Hmm. Yeah, cool. Naushad, how did
Oh,
you discover Paso?
mine's easy. Paul was like, "Hey, we got it's time for the second book. We're gonna do it on Paso." I was like, "That's a great idea. Let's do Paso." And we
You're all
drove
about
it.
Napa to begin
Yeah,
with.
yeah.
Yeah.
Napa was like easy, because I knew it a little bit better. But I didn't know anything about Paso. So that February, I was telling you, like the month before COVID, was my first time in Paso.
Oh
And
yeah, that's right. It was.
so that's where I met you, and I got to meet a lot of wonderful people over that weekend. Um, and just had an incredible time. Drank incredible wines, and you can talk about a place as much as you want, but unless you're there and you feel it, you feel the vibe and you feel the energy, you won't really know it. And I
Hmm.
think that you can't say that enough. So I can sit here and I can tell you, yeah, the people were great, the restaurants are great. Yeah, I can tell you all these things. But when I was there and I felt it, it's much different. And since then, I've been back in 2 years. Even during COVID, I've been, this. I've probably been back like 4 times, I think. Taking people, brought my family and my brothers and stuff with me, and just had an incredible time. And it's not for research for the book. It was just, I just really dig it. Um, and I think it's having a moment. I think Paso is beginning to have a moment because there's so many external factors that are contributing to its growth that is just going to be exponential, in my opinion, over the next 5 years. Um, and we can
For
get into.
wine, though, in general, you were talking a little bit about from almost from a cultural standpoint, like, wine can be, intimidating to some.
Yeah.
What's your journey into wine like? I mean, did you grow up with wine? Is that something that was part of your upbringing? Is this new?
No. So in my career, I owned a advertising agency that did strategy and creative work, which I sold in 17. But one of my biggest clients was Yamaha Watercraft, so the division of Yamaha that makes the big jet powered boats and the Wave Runner products. The digital marketing director for Yamaha, who's become a good friend in the last decade, he runs a website called CostcoWineblog.com, which he's owned for 15 years. It's just a passion project for him. He buys wine at the Costco and he rates them and talks about them on this website. And he has like, a gajillion followers and readers and whatnot. Anyways, he got me into wine because the first night I go to dinner with him, he's my client. I don't know him from Adam really. We go out to dinner and we're sitting at a restaurant, and the wine book comes along and it gets handed to him, and he said something to the sommelier. He said something that indicated to the sommelier that this dude knows wine. It was a very brief exchange. There was no highbrow conversation. It was a really quick something that he said, which indicated to the som that, hey, excuse me, this man knows what's up. And then all of a sudden the dynamic changed between what wines were coming to the table versus what they would have been had he not indicated that. And I asked him, I said, Andrew, what was that? And he explained to me. And at that moment, I was like, okay, I gotta be able to do that, And I think I've been lucky enough to be able to do some things like that. But he was the one that got me into wine.
Awesome. Well, and it's funny, I completely spaced the fact that your first kind of visit and your first foray into Paso Robles wine country, I was there and I was a part of. I actually kind of spaced that. So that's actually kind of cool. And then here we are, we've got a book. What challenges did you guys find in COVID aside? Because I know that, made lots of things kind of challenging, but in putting this book together, I mean, not everybody just sits there and decides, oh, let's make a book on this area,
Yeah. I think in order to make a book like this worthwhile, you can't, as so many people do, just sit at home and do internet research. I went up there. I went to the Historical Society, in the basement of the Carnegie Library. I did a lot of research that you just simply can't do any other way because there's a really interesting history, as you know, to that area. I mean, gosh, Jesse James was up there. A lot of great Italian families established themselves there and really figured out how to grow Zinfandel. The mission system, of course, played an important part in the history of Paso. And this was all really fascinating to me. And I wanted to try to condense all that history into one single chapter. So that took a lot of work. Um, the other difficult thing, of course, was cracking cracking open those sub AVAs because so few people know a lot about them, and that's where we relied upon you, Chris, and your knowledge, because it takes a tremendous amount of research to find, I mean, it's easy enough to write about, I don't know, Willow Creek or Templeton Gap, but, Creston, Highlands, Estrella, um, I knew next to nothing about them. They're brand new, right? These ABs have only been around for a little while. So that was another big challenge. And I didn't want the book to shortchange the readers in that respect, because that's one of the big things about Paso in the last several years. I think the biggest development was the determination of these sub AVAs and what they mean.
Yeah,
So I really wanted to make sure we did a good job of explaining them. So that was a challenge. Interviews with
definitely.
makers was easy because I've known a lot of them for many years and they're great to talk to. So that was like
Yeah,
filling out.
how did you decide who you were going to interview? Because that was kind of neat. And to be honest, maybe I just wasn't paying attention or whatever, but your winemaker interviews, when I saw who you interviewed, I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know you were doing that. I mean, how did that come about?
I
Um,
think, sorry, one quick note on that is there's some people that think that, certain winemakers paid to play. And there was no one that paid us anything,
yeah,
right? We chose winemakers either because Paul knew that they knew something and they were instrumental to the story that we were trying to say.
Mhm.
Um, so that was mostly why they were chosen, but I'll let Paul jump into it.
yeah. I wanted a diversity of winemakers and winemaking philosophies. I wanted men. I wanted women. I wanted certainly winemakers from well-known wineries and more obscure winemakers. I thought, for example, Vic Hugo Roberts is a great guy because he's been there forever, right? And
Yeah,
it's really, it's literally a mom and pop operation, as you know. The tasting room is still two barrels and a board in a barn. I wanted that kind of voice among the winemakers too.
yeah,
Someone who doesn't have grand goals of being, one of the major winemakers of the world, but just makes great wine and is happy to do it in small amounts. So that's why someone like Vic was included. So we
yeah.
tried for diversity. We tried diversity of all kinds, different parts of Paso, different voices, big, small winemakers.
No, you mean it's great because you got Austin Hope, Jordan Fiorentini over there at Epic,
Hmm.
Guillaume Fabre at Close to Lynn, Gary Everly Winery, Janelle Ducey, Jay Ducey, Daniel Dow. I think you already mentioned Vic Roberts. You got Steve Peck from J Lore and Justin Smith from Saxum. And that was, that's a really great representation of our area and from a lot of really cool voices that are often really great spokespeople. So,
And
and they're good interviews. You got to read through them.
and
Yeah.
and part of it also, I think, was some of those names you mentioned, like Eberly and Steve Peck, and they can give us the historical background of Paso,
Right.
right? Even like Janelle talking about her family and that influence, she can give us that historical perspective really clearly. And then you have people like, Daniel Dow and I would say Jordan Fiorentini, who could probably tell you a little bit about where things are going moving forward.
Yeah.
So there is this broad range of looking back and also looking forward that the interviews talk about.
I thought Guillaume Fabre was important to include because I think there's a certain element in Paso, which is the European trained winemaker who comes to Paso specifically because he likes the fact that there are no rules in Paso, and that's true of Stefan Aseo and Guillaume Fabre and a couple of others. And Guillaume was quite emphatic on that point.
We have an interesting question that comes from Dave Rappaport. How would you compare and contrast Paso and Napa? Everyone says that Paso is much more friendly, but it is much younger than Napa. I think we'll start there because he has a few more little tidbits here. But in putting this book together, for instance, and I never want to compare us. I mean, Napa's Napa. We're who we are, but at least from your standpoint in putting these books together and getting around the area and just from your point of view, I mean, how would you compare us or contrast us?
Naushad, you start. You've got some opinions on this, I know.
No, I think so. We're not talking about the wine here. I'm not going to speak from that perspective. I'm going to talk from the point of view and experience of kind of putting the book together, Chris, as you said, to answer that question. So winemakers in both those regions were very kind to us. They're very open. They're very nice. And we try to do the same thing where we spoke to people that were extremely well known. You're talking about Celia Welch. You're talking about Jean-Charles Boissiet. And then you're talking about newer, more younger winemakers or newer ones. But the winemakers themselves are really, really kind to us. I think the biggest difference to me was in the support of the Wine Alliance. Right. I think the Napa Vintners Association, who was helpful, I think they just don't have I think it's a matter of resources. I don't think they have the bandwidth. And I think they're just doing too much, right? Napa is a big boy in the space. And they're very busy there as well. That was the difference. I think you and the Paso Robles Wine Alliance was much more open. I think we had just more access to you and some of the wealth of knowledge that you guys all possess. And it was a little bit tougher getting that wealth of knowledge that we needed out of Napa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me,
I mean, we partner with Napa Valley Vintners and some things out there like the truth and labeling and a few other things. And so we often are talking to each other anyway. Mm-hmm. When need be on major state issues and the like. And so they're a bigger operation for
for sure.
They are. So.
To me, the contrast is in what I would call focus. Napa is really about the perfection of the Bordeaux blend, right? Chardonnay and Cab and Bordeaux blends, which is great. And so there's a lot of pressure, I think, on Napa winemakers, at least the high-end ones, to make that perfect Napa Cab. And that's great. They do that very, very well. Paso its focus is completely different. It's a much bigger area, of course, well over 600,000 acres, right, in total. And they have the ability to grow wine grapes from many different regions. And so that gives rise to a much greater variety and also more experimentation. And I think it's logical that the Paso blend happened where it did. There's just more opportunity to experiment and try that. And so I think as a result, Paso has attracted the kind of winemaker that does like to experiment more and does not like to adhere as much to a pre-existing gold standard or some single varietal or single blend.
Yeah. Do you think Paul and Naushad, do you think in a sense we are where maybe we hear this a lot and I'd love to get your point of view and maybe you don't have an opinion on this, but do you think that Paso is where it is right now in our timeline? Was Napa at this stage at some point in their timeline? And then are we on that same trajectory as Napa, or do you think we're just going to be doing our own thing no matter what? I have my opinion, obviously, which is the latter. But
I guess I'll start. I think that the history of Napa is intimately intertwined with the Mondavi family, and they really kind of almost single-handedly changed the face of Napa within a generation. I don't think you have that same kind of situation in Paso where a single family really decides the fate of an entire wine region. It's much
Mhm.
bigger. There are many more influential winemakers there. So I don't like to make an apples to apples comparison of Paso and Napa for that reason. Um, I think Napa got popular partly because of a generational shift in America. Fine wine became popular again. It took years after the end of Prohibition for that to happen. And Paso just represents I think, a different generation and a different set of wine tastes, really. And again, it's not so much influenced by the power of a single family. Um, and of
Yeah.
course, Davis were brilliant marketers too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and a family that had a lot to do with that region's growth. But I think you say something that's, I think, really important though, is the Paso blend, and it still continues. It's funny. I just saw something on Instagram from a writer who was holding a bottle of Paso wine that was a blend of Valdegui, Cinsault, and Negrette. And like, where else can you do that? Right?
Yeah.
You know, and pull it off. Like here, Paso. And so my opinion on that one, no shit, I'll still get your opinion, but my opinion, no, I don't think so. I mean, you know, prices are going to rise, things are going to get a little different. You know, we're getting to the point now because of COVID that everybody's going to the appointment based model, and we're going to have a lot of kind of graduation into, you know, some new ways of doing business. But I think our personality will always be here. You know, you still see a lot of brands like um, Victor Hugo, like you were saying. I mean, they're still around. They're still, you know, producing wines, and then you have new brands that are actually falling right into that same model, like Clessy or
Mm.
even Bella Luna, who, you know, they're still owner operators, small winemakers, you know, carrying the torch in a sense, and in that Paso style that are very open and owner operated. So
Mhm, mhm.
I'm very curious to see where Paso is going to be in the very near future as an observer of all of this, because to me, there are external factors that are contributing to Paso having the stage set for them. One of which is right before COVID happened, there was a lot of reports, especially from the Silicon Valley Bank report on wine, about the oversupply that Napa has of wine, which also was a problem because they couldn't charge anything more. They already raised the prices so dang high, and now you have an oversupply, and you're not going to lower your prices. So that was a challenge. Number two, there's weather patterns over the last several years that have really impacted Napa in not a good way,
The Sonoma too.
um,
Yeah.
in Sonoma as well. Number three, I think you're starting to see Paso wines getting well. You start seeing them more in the trade, so more sommeliers, more people in that world are getting to know Paso wines. I think people like Hope, Austin Hope, and Daniel Dow, and what they're doing in terms of pushing the name forward is going to rise all ships. Um, and it's still affordable. Let's be honest. Oh, and sorry, that's four, affordable. Oh, one more thing, five. It's easier to get to Paso from both LA and San Francisco than it is for people in Orange County, which is a big money spending spot for wine, to head up to Napa on a regular basis. So there's a multitude of things, I think, the last one being very local to Southern California, um, that are really set the stage where Paso is going. So I think the next 5 years are going to be instrumental in determining what Paso will be.
Mm.
yeah, well put. And it feels like you know, we see these every 5 year kind of discussions often, but right now it's very poignant considering coming out of the whole you know, COVID haze and
Yeah.
shutdown and everything else. It's like we're poised right now to see a kind of a new kind of time period to track and to actually watch and appreciate, and hopefully look back on and go, oh yeah, okay, we got that right, or or oh shit, we were wrong.
Well, then it's like, then you just iterate, right? You just like change course. You're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
this didn't work. Let's kind of take what we learned here and see if we can move in this direction, this over
Well,
here.
and I'll say in my 15 years in this seat, and talking about and promoting Paso and just being, that spokesperson for Paso, um, I feel like I've been hearing, oh, Paso, you're becoming Napa for 15 years.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
And I mean, Napa's great. It's awesome up there.
Delicious.
Wines, it's really pretty, but I don't think we're gonna become in some people's sense of Napified or Napavization or however you create an adverb or adjective or whatever else you want to call it, using Napa to describe Paso. I don't think we'll ever actually be there. We
Mhm.
Where we are and the people that are here and all of that, it keeps it pretty much the same.
Yeah, a few years ago, when I was writing for the Register, I think I wrote a column or two about napification in Paso, and I think one of the things that triggered it was the arrival of the deep pockets investors. There's some worry at the time about how they might change the face of an area that was still pretty rustic, and I'm happy to say that 10 years on, uh, they've integrated themselves quite well into the fabric of the community for the most part. I mean, look at Hans-Jörg Weiss at Halter Ranch. I mean, tremendous piece of land, and he's leaving most of it to wildlife corridors and not going to develop it. I think there's been a lot of sensitivity shown by certain individuals who could have, you know, come in much hotter and built up much bigger facilities, and they decided to no, they would more or less try to blend in with the prevailing aesthetic and attitude of Paso and keep things small and friendly. I got to say that surprised me a bit, and I'm happy that that did happen.
Well, I think the upside on it, honestly, is that when we had large investment come from out of area, and it actually helped a lot of other brands, because one of the hallmarks of Paso is being very kind of open and open source. And
Hmm.
so as you're able to, as a winemaker, let's just say, create opportunity for people to see how some tools or some actions, some you know practices, best practices are utilized, because money isn't an object. Then all it does is help to educate others on how maybe best practices could be incorporated in other ways, maybe without investment. And so I think that that's where Paso has benefited from out of area funds coming in and giving us, that opportunity, basically. Maybe that's just too rosy a glasses, but I think across the board, you hear that all over.
I think, well, let me ask you, I have two questions. One is, when people say Paso is turning into Napa, in your experience, Chris, what does that really mean? Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah,
What does that mean to you?
I don't know.
What is
Honestly,
it? What do you think they're talking about?
I so from my experiences of going to Napa, what do I see? It's great wines, right? Okay, they're already great wines. Is it a little pricier? Yeah, well, kind of, but I mean, it's pricier. It's what do you expect? I mean, but if you go to the high, super high end places, yeah, okay, but I'm not going to those. I mean,
Right.
really. Also, is it a little busier and is it a little, more expensive to overnight and things like that? Well, yeah, it is. So it's a little busier up there. They also have kind of a certain marquee or a certain cachet as still being known as California wine country. We're trying to change that, of course, and have been for many years, to basically be able to hopefully within and in that same conversation of California wine country, where you say Napa, you're also saying Paso, Sonoma, Monterey, Santa Barbara. But that's, I suppose, what it kind of means to me.
Okay. Yeah. I hear you saying two things, right? One is just number of people in traffic and getting busy, right?
Mm.
Is that going to not happen in Paso? It is. It already is, right? That's gonna happen. You want that to happen to some extent. for marketing purposes and for the viability of the economics in the region. The second thing is I think when people are saying that, in my opinion, I think they're just talking about price. I think they're just
Wine
like,
price. Yeah,
sorry,
the price of wine.
the price of wine. I think it's, and also to stay. I mean, there's this conversation that we had with what's his name, Eric Jensen. He was saying that, look, I went to Napa, I can afford it, right? But I had to spend all this money for a weekend in Napa. Like,
There's
it was ridiculous. Like, how
there's a
can
laugh
people
because
afford this?
he's
How
not
could people?
exactly a poor man, you know.
No, but it caught his attention, right? It's like, it is so bloody. So how do you is it repeatable? Is it scalable to keep going up there? How much can you buy from there? Are you limiting your market? So I think when people say napification, I truly think they're talking about pricing and how
Right.
that's
And I think
affected them.
part of it is, Paso might have kind of set a trap for itself by being so reasonably priced compared to Napa for so many years. And prices, prices are rising, but I think justifiably so. And it's still, I think, a relative bargain compared to a lot of other wine regions.
I should
Um,
interject that we kind of got down this subject of the comparison of Napa and Paso simply because these two gentlemen have produced two books in recent times, one about Napa, one about Paso. And so our conversation is, in a sense, whether it's evolving or digressing, it's going by way of this comparison and conversation that we're having. So you all know how and what we're talking about. But I also see the fact that, and this is something I think that we've all always, you were kind of talking about it, Naushad, about how where we are geographically, and that Orange County has quite a ways to go to get up to Napa versus here we are in driving distance and striking distance, within the day, without having to actually spend all day, maybe out on the five and fast food and large trucks. That you get to actually be here and enjoy it and enjoy your time within the day the same day that you left. But it's also the other way around in that here in Paso, we've always been halfway between these two metropolitan cities, being San Francisco and LA, two major feeder markets, two major airports. And so to get here and establish yourself here, you're not calling it in, you're not day tripping in. So you're not going to see the kind of absentee owner, if you will, within a brand of saying, oh, I own a winery. It's you're actually involved in it. You're setting roots, you're here. And that lends itself to the personality of our region because now you're all in, you're involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the inside out, that's what makes Paso unique. And that's what, is going to keep us a little bit more grounded and a little bit more honest. I mean, not to say that our friends to the north aren't. It's just that that's a different product. It's kind of like when you go to the grocery store or to the bottle shop or something, and the wines up here are going to be a little bit more pricey than the wines down here, but there's still somebody buying all shelves, all in between.
mhm.
So there's always going to be a buyer, and that's the product that they want. You might go out and buy a Mercedes Benz, and I might go out and buy a Subaru. And not to say that one's necessarily fully better than the other, but I'll tell you what, the Subaru is going to be more affordable to me anyway than a Mercedes Benz. And so, but they're still great cars, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the comparison.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I don't think you're going to go to a cellar and eat any of our homes and not see bottles from like everywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that ain't gonna happen. It's not gonna be all Paso or all Napa or all anything. It's gonna be
So what's next for Paso though? What are you seeing? Like what here you've written this book, if you could go back and change anything for one thing, what would it be that you didn't include
Oh,
or something of
well,
that sort? And then also what's next? What do you want to see out of this region?
I'll tell you one thing that we couldn't include because it was beyond our purview is how Paso has developed culinarily in the last generation. I remember going up there in the 90s and talking to somebody saying, well, if you want a really good meal, you got to go down to SLO, San Luis Obispo, right? And there's like one good restaurant in town. I won't mention any names, but now people are coming from, quite far away to dine in Paso. And I think there's a local forum movement. There's a really interesting fine cuisine movement going on in Paso right now, which is starting to get notice. I mean, my wife is the food editor of the Orange County Register, and she's been writing about it for a few years. So that's developing hand in hand, I think, with the wine world in Paso, because I don't know who it was that said it. You know, once good wine is established in an area, fine food follows. And
Yeah,
I think that's happening in Paso, definitely.
I believe that's a really great point. Naushad, in your experience now, I mean, what are you thinking? What are you seeing in Paso, and how are we as a wine region in your time kind of evolving?
I think where we're going to see a lot more growth is going to be in hospitality, in places to stay as a region. I think the wines are awesome. I think they're making a name for themselves. I think the winemakers are becoming great personalities in their own regard. So all of that is great. I think the question is going to be, well, how do you support the number of people that are coming here with places to stay? I know that sounds very kind of brass tacks, but that's what I think the challenge is. I think there's not enough places to stay. I think affordability is going to come into question, because once you develop new places, there's a cost associated with that, and
Mhm.
what will that cost be? I don't know if we'll know. I think you'll have to expand the Airbnb licenses, which are probably already in the works with the city.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's just going to be, well, how do we, what's the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support the growth that's going to happen? So I
Right.
anticipate exponential growth in the next 5 years
Yeah.
in Paso.
Well, and another sensitive issue, of course, is water usage and the state of the aquifer. And there's a lot of really smart people debating, Paso's future as it relates to the aquifer and water usage. And that I think is going to ultimately determine the limits of viticulture and other development in the region.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you guys have any plans on another wine region? Are you already kind of contemplating and thinking another book? Or, I mean, we're still selling this book, and this book's still out there. We don't want to, get your attention elsewhere yet. But
Yeah, I can answer that because also my family and I were just in Portugal for a couple of weeks on kids' spring break and vacation. Our first time leaving the country in a while. Anyways, but we went to the Douro Valley, and the designer in our Drive to Napa book has won a design award, and this one will probably win as well. The designer, her name is Kathy Lajvardi. She's an award-winning art director and also happens to be my wife. She Yeah, but it's not like, oh, my wife likes art. This is like if you watch the movie Iron Man, all the TV commercials are her. Did Beyonce's last concert graphic, Madonna's last concert graphic. So it's kind of like a real deal artist, right? Anyways, we were in the Douro Valley and we were just so enchanted with the place because it's still relatively kind of not that popular. The Portuguese wine region, even though it's one of the oldest wine regions, I think, in history in the world. Um, so maybe Paul, what do you think about drive through Douro Valley?
After Duro. It's a bit of a commute from here. We like to sometimes we talk about this and both of us have said, well, let's leave it up to our readers. Like, what would they like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
migration to be? And we've heard people want us to do Sonoma, Washington State, Oregon, of course. British Columbia is really interesting to me because I'm from there, and it's got a really interesting and up and coming wine region. So I don't know. It's up for debate right now. We haven't decided yet.
awesome.
Douro
Well,
Valley.
guys, we're already getting to 1 hour. This is the Paso Wine Hour, and I want to save a moment in time to be able to talk a little bit about what's happening with Paso Wine. We have Paso Wine Fest coming up May 21st. We want to make sure you guys have enough time to get your tickets, get to pasowine.com and have a look at all of the different opportunities to be able to come to Paso Robles during Paso Wine Fest. We've got Sparkling Paso, which is an event on that Friday, all about sparkling wines in Paso Robles. We've got a few brands that are going to be showcasing their wines. We've got wine seminars as well, our maker seminars. We've got the Icons of Cab seminar that's selling really well. And then we've got an organics, like organic, biodynamic, and regenerative organic certified seminar where we've got a couple of great, not a couple, but a few great brands that are all participating in that. And that's your opportunity to sit down at these maker seminars and learn from our winemakers and taste really, really good, awesome wines in a cool educational setting. So look out for those. And then of course, just the grand tasting. I mean, it's going to be really cool. We moved it over to the fairgrounds. So check it out on pasowine.com. Also, for any of you in San Diego, we have set the date. June 17th is going to be a grand tasting event that we're going to be doing down there. We are signing contracts and getting venues and all that kind of good stuff right now as we speak. Quite literally, I just got an email for the contract as we're sitting here. And so we will be promoting that here pretty soon. We're going to be doing some winemaker dinners over at the Wine Vault down there in San Diego, and some other fun little activations. So check it out. It should be June 15 to 17 with our main event on the 17th down in San Diego. So check out pasowine.com for that, and check out pasowine.com for the next Paso Wine Hour. I'll be honest, I don't have a subject yet for next week. And then the weeks following, we've got a Paso Wine School in town. So I'm hosting a bunch of buyers. So we won't be having a show that day. And then we get into Paso Wine Fest. And so we might have to see you after next show on the other side of Paso Wine Fest. So thanks, everybody. Naushad, Paul, thank you guys. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for the fun acknowledgements also inside the book, because yours truly did help out a little bit with this book. And so I appreciate that, that little shout out in the book. But guys, thanks so much for being on today.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for the opportunity. The book is available on Amazon. And if you do look at the acknowledgement for Chris in the book, you'll see an outline of a beard, because I call him the Beard of Paso. So please feel free to continue calling him the Beard of Paso.
I don't remember seeing the outline.
It's at the beginning of the AVA chapters.
It is? No way. I totally missed that.
I believe it's there, but yeah, go look for it.
That's awesome. Paul, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on. All right, you guys, we'll see you next time on the Paso Wine Hour. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Bye.
Bye.